Hello, and you know what? I'm going to try something new today, so you're going to have to bear with me. But I have two articles which I picked up the other day that are so amazing. I believe so right on that I just felt that I needed to share them with you. And so I'm going to share them with you in a way that I have never done before. I'm going to kind of read them. They got some great graphs and info. What do they call these things? Infographics. So anyway, this is Randy Kirk. Hit like and subscribe and notify. And of course, you definitely want to remember to get your Cybertruck vehicles, your cyber openers, $25. You know how to do it. Okay. And then join Patreon. Okay. Now we got all that out of the way. Let's jump into this amazing article. We're going to be talking about where is the economy going? Where have a bunch of the economists got it wrong? We already know the Fed's got it wrong, but even some of the economists that you and I trust, not so great. So let's take a look at what they say. And you might be unsurprised to find out that one of the reasons I'm showing it to you is because this is what I've been saying all year. Okay, all right, let's get into it. So the number one thing, this is a Forbes article from over the weekend. Inflation is over. Where have you heard that before? 3 good months in a row, according to the Financial Times. The core PCE, which excludes volatile energy and food prices, rose just 0.1% in August compared to July. Over the last 3 months, it has risen at an annualized rate of 2.16. Well, if you've got the last 3 months in a row going at an annualized rate of 2.16, what would be your reason for thinking that it's going to go up month over month by more than this 1.1% that it did last month? I'm trying to figure out where they're going to get that information. And Powell has said he's looking for 6 months in a row, 5 to 6 months in a row, to be sure that inflation is over. Well, okay, then how about the year over year versus 6 month and 3 month annualized rates? Well, let's look at the 6 month annualized rate, 2.98. The 3 month, we just said 2.16. Yeah, oh yes, the year is 3.87, but why are we going all the way back a year? And that's what the article goes on to talk about. In fact, the 3 month trailing run rate annualized has been declining all year. So here you see it. Look at that decline. It kind of reminds you of the Truthflation chart that I keep putting up. It's like this, it's like straight down, and there's like nothing to suggest that the trend is not going to continue, in fact, to go into potentially deflation. So the economy has been in disinflation by this measure for a year. Okay, this is a strong indication that let me brighten that up a little bit. This is a strong indication that inflation is over. If over means that the current rate has fallen back nearly to the Fed's 2% desired target. 2 questions might arise. Is it legitimate to use a shorter term run rate, 3 months, rather than the traditional 12-month rate, or even the 6 month rate? So that's the question they're asking. Whoops, that's just an ad. Is it legitimate? Number 2, is it legitimate to rely on the core PCE, which excludes food and energy, instead of the headline PCE, which includes all components? So their justification for the short run rate. The Federal Reserve has been criticized for being late to recognize the emergence of inflationary trends in 2021 and 2022. This is largely a consequence of the Fed's reliance on year-over-year measures of inflation, which create a built-in delay. Okay, so you're looking in your rear view mirror already, but you're looking in your rear view mirror about something that is 100 miles back instead of what's about a mile back or a half a mile back, which might be important. So this is largely which creates a built-in delay in the inflation signal, as described in another column. By emphasizing year-over-year comparisons, the Fed can't see changes in price trends until long after they've occurred. Averaging over a period longer than a single month is reasonable to compensate for the high volatility in month-to-month readings, but only up to a point. The longer the averaging interval, the more information is lost or becomes stale. Averaging the signal out over a full year, looking backward, means the Fed will be too slow to capture the changes in the economy, as some prominent economists are beginning to recognize. And we have seen that. More and more are starting to say so. Most working economists consider a year to be too long of a lag. The inflation situation is changing rapidly. Paul Krugman. Not that I always agree with Paul Krugman or almost ever agree with him, but for once I do. The year-over-year measure is out of date by definition. Year-over-year means it's out of date. Averaging over the past 3 to 6 months provides a much more accurate picture of the current state of the economy while still moderating the monthly volatility. This is not a radical idea. Financial journals have begun to cite the 3-month run rate more often, and it gives 3 examples. Even some Fed leaders have started quoting the 3-month and 6-month rates in a favorable contrast to the traditional year-over-year comparisons. Lael Brainerd, former vice chair of the Fed, gave a speech in January that implicitly recommended short-term averages over the traditional year-over-year figures. And here's the quote: inflation in December is likely to have a run at around 2.3% annualized pace on a 3- and 6-month basis, as compared with 5.1 on a 12-month basis. Okay, a consensus on this point is developing. I predict in the future the shorter averaging intervals will displace the year-over-year measure. Why the core PCE is preferable. Food and energy prices are consistent sources of monthly volatility. Core measures remove these from the index for a more accurate picture of broad inflation trends. And look what's happened with oil just over the last 3 months or 4 months. Shot up like crazy, like 40% or something in a very short period of time, and then crashed down 20% in another short period of time. The volatility reduction is significant. From 2000 until 2019, the headline PCE was 2.5 times more volatile than the core PCE. And here it shows you this volatility. Look at the swings that we see here to here, the here to here. Look at the swing just recently here to here. So you can see how it makes sense to be looking at the core instead of the headline number. Gasoline prices in particular contribute to the increase in the headline PCE in August. Over the last 10 years, the year-over-year price of gasoline measured weekly was almost 17 times more volatile than the core PCE. A more sophisticated volatility reduction strategy is found in the index developed by the Dallas Federal Reserve, and it's called the trimmed mean PCE, which dynamically eliminates the biggest gainers and the biggest decliners from the index each month, kind of a smoothing effect. They don't say that, that was me. This metric allows even more clearly the disinflation and even deflation now developing in the economy. If you take this Fed-developed method, which smooths things out, you can see that we are already in deflation. Okay, now you go on to another ad. In sum, we get a better picture of what is really happening right now by using a shorter averaging period and trimming the most volatile components in the index. Jason Furman, a Harvard University professor and former administrative official, said that U.S. data marked 3 unambiguously good months in a row for core inflation, which excludes energy and food and is watched closely by central banks as a gauge of underlying price pressures. That's from the Financial Times. 2, consumer spending has accelerated in the last year. Inflation came down anyway. Oh, so inflation induced by lower supplies of raw materials may call for a policy response different from the traditional tonic of demand restriction called for by garden variety inflation generated by excess demand. So in other words, we've always looked at the supply-demand situation that was going on at any given time and said, well, you know, if you got too many dollars and too much demand chasing too few goods, then you're going to get this inflation. Well, the question is inflation being created by that oversaturation of demand? Well, okay. One of the standard theories of inflation holds that it is caused by excess demand, too many buyers, too much money, crowding the market, bidding up prices. Was this the cause of the inflationary spasm in 2021-22? No. The large post-pandemic stimulus programs made this demand-driven model of inflation seem plausible. $5 trillion flooded the economy, including $800 billion in cold cash distributed to ordinary people. Stimulus checks direct to individuals and families. It seemed obvious to many that all this money would find its way into the economy in form of higher spending. Indeed, what was the explicit purpose of the stimulus? That was it. And it also seemed obvious to critics that it would stoke inflation. Tracking the effects of stimulus money through the economy is challenging, but all the charts show that the effects of the multiple shocks that set the system ringing like a bell in 2020 and 2021, right here, you can see it. It all went into savings. It's all right there. We talked about this. Initially, however, the surge in consumer income went almost entirely into savings, not spending. Savings quadrupled to nearly $4 trillion and then slowly bled out into increased spending over time. The chaos took 18 months to work through the system, with both savings and spending gyrating wildly. It is difficult to model these effects. Once the normal pattern was reestablished, however, spending continued to rise even as inflation began to fall. Spending continued to rise even as inflation began to fall dramatically, it should say. In the last 6 months, consumer spending has accelerated, raising at an annual rate of 5%, while inflation, PCE core monthly annualized run rate, has fallen from 4.1 to 1.8. Another chart. Look at that. Crazy, huh? So, their ad, in short, inflation is now falling even as consumer spending is rising. While the stimulus did to some degree stimulate consumer expenditures, the recent rise in prices cannot be fully explained by excess demand. Recent inflation was principally caused by constraints on the supply side, as several recent columns have said. Number 3, wage pressure is not driving inflation. The Fed is obsessed over the strength of the labor markets, right up to this week's stronger than expected jobs growth data. It's not clear that this has anything to do with inflation. Wage growth, like spending, has been trending upwards, while inflation has declined sharply over the last 6 months. So here you go again. Here's wages going up and up and up, not horribly, but going up, staying close to the range that the Fed would like, but inflation is going down. Now, that could be a lagging indicator. We understand that. Here's inflation falling sharply, but no change in employment. The employment rate has stayed the same. The unemployment rate has stayed the same. This contravenes the other stalwart of conventional wisdom of the cause of inflation, wage pressure. The idea that labor costs are decisive in driving price increases is deeply rooted in mainstream economic theory. The famous, and unstable Phillips curve treats labor market tightness as a central explanatory factor in inflation. It posits a trade-off. That is an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment, such that low unemployment leads to tight labor conditions, which embolden and empower workers to demand higher wages, driving up prices. Now, if that were true, the current historically low unemployment should have sustained a much higher inflation rate, which did not happen. Inflation came down as unemployment remained steady. We have had tremendous labor shortages now for 4 years, 5 years. This is not a new thing. It started back in the Trump administration, where we hit the lowest unemployment rates in generations. And so this is not new. We've been sitting here with basically a full employment now for something like 4 or 5 years. Well, okay, how is it that inflation hasn't gone up during that 4 or 5 years even more than it did? In the most virulent form, wage pressure becomes, in the minds of theorists, the dreaded wage price spiral. Wage increases cause price increases, which in turn cause wage increases, and this just continues on. This inspires policymakers to look for ways to increase unemployment, thereby reducing consumer demand, weakening labor's ability to win further wage increases. This script, raising unemployment to reduce demand and tame inflation, has become scripture for many economic pundits. It was only a year ago that Larry Summers told us that, quote, we need 5 years of unemployment above 5% to contain inflation. In other words, we need 2 years of 7.5% unemployment, or 5 years of 6% unemployment, or 1 year of 10% unemployment to bring inflation under control. In the year since that pronouncement, a year marked by the most rapid monetary tightening program in American history, unemployment has remained essentially unchanged, stuck at the lowest levels in history. The labor market is healthy. Too many people have jobs, making too much money. At the same time, and against all expectations, inflation has plummeted and essentially has now disappeared. In fact, is going into deflation. Even Professor Summers had to at least scratch his head over this turn of events. He says, The inflation performance at this point is better than I think many standard models would have predicted. Boy, is that an understatement? There's actually a lot of head scratching going on. The economists, for example, ask, why are the labor markets breaking the historical rule? And a bit ruefully, why aren't more people being sacked? Oh my goodness. Well, deflation is the real threat. The ultra low PCE for August, taken together with several other metrics, points to the danger of deflation lurking around the corner. Now, here's where they're wrong. This is not a danger lurking in the corner. Deflation in this particular case is being caused by higher productivity. Look at my old videos on productivity if you don't understand this. High productivity creates good disinflation and deflation. It creates wealth. If I can buy a television, my 75-inch television sitting over here on the wall, my 75-inch, it cost me only $1,000. What would that television have cost me 5 years ago? Right? The producer price index PPI for commodities and for manufacturing have been falling, are now in deflationary territory. Here's the producer prices lead consumer products, the commodities index. You can see where core PCE is. You can see where commodities are. The PPI is a powerful leading indicator for the CPI and the PCE. Producer prices predict future consumer prices with extraordinary accuracy. I don't necessarily agree with that. I did a very deep dive on that, and I found that there was not this correlation that you could find. So I'm sorry, this is another place I'm going to disagree with the article, but it makes sense. That's why people keep studying it, is if I'm a manufacturer, I'm a wholesaler, and I'm a retailer, and I'm paying less for my raw materials or less for my products, now I should be able to predict that 2 months from now, that's going to go through and start showing up at retail. It is not as clear cut, and none of the studies have been able to prove that that's true. Now, here we get to my big issue, the money supply. The M2 measure is now flashing deflation. The growth in M2 has gone negative for the first time in history. This is potentially a problem, This is an alarming development. S&P Global has warned of a deflationary spiral leading to economic starvation. If the quote is, if the money stock continues to fall, the money supply continues to fall, it could lead to outright deflation, where prices will start to generally decline and the rate of inflation will fall below zero. Deflation is not good when it's caused by the consumer not spending and companies not spending and companies not buying more materials because they don't need them because there's no demand. That is the bad kind of deflation. Deflation, where inflation rates go negative and prices fall through the economy, can lead to diminished purchasing power and a rise in unemployment unless it's caused by productivity. If it's caused by not enough cash in the system, that is a very bad thing and can cause a very bad recession or depression. Implication: what happens now depends on whether we accept, quibble, or deny the obvious conclusion. The Fed has been late to recognize the shift from inflation to disinflation deflation. Its models and metrics do not pick it up. That's not necessarily true because Powell has talked repeatedly about things like trueflation and the fact that the rents are at zero even year over year at this point. On the side of acceptance of this, some observers are beginning to recognize that a change in our conceptions and preconceptions is called for. The labor market's persistent strength has surprised economists at the Fed, who have adjusted their unemployment forecasts down by 0.5 percentage point, and those on Wall Street, where once rampant recession predictions have been postponed or withdrawn. It has also forced a rethinking of ingrained assumption that labor market weakness is a necessary step to restore price stability. That's from Barron's just a few days ago. Some regulators are also drifting towards the light. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee, in a speech Thursday, warned against allowing interest rate policy to be guided too heavily by standard economic models that assume higher unemployment will be required to bring inflation down. We need to be extra careful about indexing policy to this traditional view, he said. If the economy is behaving differently because of a pandemic-driven distortions, following these traditional models would create a serious risk of a near-term policy error, he said. using diplomatic jargon to signal alarm. Yeah, that was actually strong. It would be a victory for humanity if one of the outcomes here were the abandonment of the cruel notion that in order to cure inflation, it is necessary to cast millions of people out of work and into poverty. That's a little strong, but the basic idea is right. In the quibble mode, there is still much fretting in the media and among policymakers over whether the labor market is too strong to allow for a shift in monetary policy. This is the higher for longer crowd. The quibblers puzzle over the right measures of labor tightness, whether job openings is a better or worse indicator than, let's say, quit rates. The role played by labor market conditions is giving rise to and sustaining price inflation in this very front of mind of the Federal Reserve, and is very front of mind for the Federal Reserve these days, which is worrisome. It often seems as though faced with clear evidence, let that sink in, faced with clear evidence that inflation is coming down in most segments, in fact, in more than most, the Fed needs to find some hook on which to hang its case for higher rates or higher for longer, and labor tightness has become that hook. This is not exactly the nihilism of Professor Summers' 2022 pronouncements, but it is still a form of resistance to the idea that labor costs may not be the real problem. Then there is the disinflation, deflation deniers. Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland President Loretta Mester said that the U.S. Central Bank will likely need to raise rates one more time this year and then hold them at higher levels for some time to get inflation back to its 2% target. She's not alone. Dozens and dozens of articles I've read have been saying, no, don't stop now. It's that last 1% is going to be so hard to get. Mester said that the rate of inflation remains too high. She said the raising gas prices resonates strongly with consumers who could expect inflation to start accelerating again, except that since this was said, gas prices are plummeting, oil prices are plummeting. Now the war can change that, but that's another issue. Inflation remains too high. But this is obtuse, according to the article. Depressingly, many in the denier camp still occupy positions of authority, either in the public media or at the Fed or other central banks, where they still have the power to cause real suffering through their misguided pronouncements and bad policy decisions. We can hope that their influence is eroding as the disinflationary, deflationary picture becomes clearer. So, there you have it. Does that sound anything like what I've been saying? I think they made some great points on top of my analysis, but I will tell you, I've been saying this for ever since the channel started. You can go back and look at my earliest statements earlier this year. Inflation was dead. I've been saying that for months and months and months. Interest rates do not need to go up. They need to stop doing the interest rate increases. I'm now saying that bonds will start to count the bond rates, the treasury bond rates, the yields will start to come down, maybe even this week, depending again on the war. We should be able to get back down to that 4.25 range, and then maybe fall below that as these inflation numbers start coming out that prove what has been said in this article. In particular, when the next PCE comes out, if it's a 0.1% again, I forgot. It's been so long since I played tennis. Game match set. And then with regard to labor is tremendously restricted right now, continues to be restrictive. Yes, there are not enough jobs not enough people for all the jobs that are out there that people need. But guess what? One of the big problems is there's not enough skill in those who are still looking for work, or they've been out of the market for so long that they can't come back and provide the kind of skills that are needed by these companies. So there's a skill imbalance with regard to the market. There is also an imbalance with regard to teenagers because, we need entry-level workers too. We really, really need the entry-level people. But if you got to pay $20 for a McDonald's employee in California, there's plenty of adults that are going to take that job. The teenagers are not going to get that job. Some of my teenage grandchildren have been running into that, where they've been applying for jobs. They can't get the job, at these minimum wage starting jobs. Why? Because adults are taking those jobs. So there you have it. There's my analysis. I have another article which I wanted to share with you, but I think we've gone on long enough for this particular version. I'll do that on another day. It is about the amount of wealth in the hands of seniors. You know, I've been talking about that also. So the money supply issue, I continue to believe, is an incredible, important one to talk about. We do not want to get to a place where there's not enough money in the economy to work, but there's so much money in the hands of seniors, it becomes less worrisome. I will provide that article on another day. All right, that's all I got for you. Oh yeah, I know you'll be so sad if I didn't say like, subscribe, notify. I've got 2 Brian Wangs and 2 Brian White. Great interviews that you'll want to see. One was just a little while ago. I'll put a card up here. Another, like maybe 2 of them will be on tomorrow, maybe another one on Wednesday or maybe Thursday. Anyway, quite good stuff coming up, along with my normal morning show, my normal midweek Wednesday show, all that stuff. You want to be notified, right? And then join Patreon. I am putting up news articles all the time now on Patreon. I have to admit, there hasn't been any news again this morning because it's Columbus Day and because all anybody's talking about is Israel. And I've already said all I want to say about Israel for now. Yeah, Patreon, I'm sorry, there's been nothing to put up this morning, but I'm sure by tonight and tomorrow, we'll have lots more content that we'll be starting to put up in terms of Tesla news that you'll get first on Patreon. So sign up for Patreon. $5 level. You can do a test where you test drive for 7 days. You can find out whether that is useful. Find out whether what I'm saying in those quick articles is beneficial to you. And then, of course, if you get it at the $10 level, you can also get a free Cybertruck. And then if you don't want to join Patreon, but you want the Cybertruck, you can be one like all these people that keep ordering 10. They're getting their Christmas in order early. I mean, this is October. We haven't even had Prime Day yet. That is this Wednesday, I think. So maybe you're saving your money for Prime Day. After Prime Day and you got any money left, buy yourself 5 or 10 of these. If you buy 10, give you a deal. Just get in touch with me down below, or if you're on X, go ahead and DM me on X, and we'll talk about a better price when you get beyond 10. Or maybe you'd rather buy it on Amazon on Prime Day. Maybe you have a reason to do it that way, except it's going to cost you $29.95 on Prime as opposed, or on Amazon, as opposed to $25 you could buy it from me. Okay, that's all I got. Let's close it down. As always, of course, it has been great talking to you.